price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. That's the price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. Been playing this game since I was 10 years of age. I wanted to make my mark ever since my Pop Warner days. When I strapped that helmet, I'm knocking dudes into a blaze. A lockdown corner going all the way through 7th and 8th grade. Entering high school, I'm ready to write another page. Busting my ass and lifting weights. It's a much higher level, but I'm still making plays. No time to party or bask in my glory days. It's college preparatory classes every single day. Living my life with that singular goal. It's the fire inside that makes me whole. Looking in the mirror, my muscles swole. I'm on a mission, and I'm never gonna stop. When the ball's in the air like Sherman, I'm a hawk. And I promise I'll overcome whatever life throws at me. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ageless Movement Podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Lohman.
I'm Sang Pornak.
All right. Today we're going to talk about foot function, foot movement, everything foot. But before we get into it, I just want to personally address the vaccines. Everyone's talking about them. You've probably heard a lot of different things about the vaccines. I just want to briefly go over how they work and try to convince you that they are safe. And I took a lot of notes because I didn't want to get any of this wrong. And it's a lot of information here, and I feel like it's very relevant. Okay, so the first thing I want to get across to you is all these vaccines are doing is preparing your immune system to actually attack and destroy the coronavirus. And how do they do it? Real simple. We're not going to get too deep into the weeds on this, but I do want to show you what they're really going after. Okay, what you can see right here is the coronavirus itself. And the main way, especially Pfizer and Moderna go after the coronavirus is by attacking what's called the glycoprotein, and all that means is spike. Glycoprotein spike. See the spikes that stick out like that? Think of it as a mace or a morning star, right, in battle. It's the same thing. These are the things that go in and engage in war against your own immune system. And the way the vaccines work is they give your own immune system an ability to attack those spikes. And once you can attack those spikes, you take away a lot of the lethalness of the coronavirus away. Now, they do it through something called messenger RNA. And the way to understand that is, so, for instance, viruses, they mutate all the time because they're comprised of a lot of different types of protein membranes, as you can see, plus the spikes and things like that. And they change. And that's partly why they're so effective at making us sick, viruses. And that's why every year when you get a flu vaccine, it's a different vaccine. Why is that? Because they have to train your immune system to fight whatever they think is going to be the flu virus that season. And sometimes they get it right, and it's great, and other times they kind of miss. But that's how it is in life, you know. You prepare for the worst case scenario. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
But it doesn't have to just be a vaccine. If you have a good immune system...
Yes, of course. But what they're saying is that the reason why they have to change the flu vaccine every year is because flu viruses change over time. Yes, your immune system should be able to fight it, but you're going to get sick first. And that's your own immune system's way of learning the virus. So if you ever see that virus again, your immune system will immediately recognize it. Much like you and I would recognize a picture of someone's face, that's how our immune system works as well. Okay, so how do they do it? How do they actually get there and kill the spike? Well, they do it through something called lipid nanoparticles, or what one particular doctor calls
butter droplets. I think that's a really funny way to describe it. And nano just means super small. And the first time I ever heard of nanoparticles is when they were talking about improving chemotherapy. Rather than blasting the whole body full of the poison that kills the cancer, you take very small sized nanoparticles and you contain it exactly to the tumor itself, on the tissue itself. So rather than killing your kidney or your pancreas or your liver, you only kill the part of it that has the cancer on it, okay? Okay, so NRA it's a common molecule. It basically instructs the immune system, much like a Post-it note. That's such a good way to explain it. So do you keep Post-it notes forever?
No.
Okay, some people do, but I don't.
They fall off.
They fall off and they just go away. That's the same thing that happens with the vaccines, okay? And basically they're, what you have to understand is that this messenger RNA is not permanent. That is something I've really taken issue with, that some people have said in the media that it's permanent, you're permanently changing your DNA. It's nonsense. It goes away. It's transient. It doesn't last. A lot of things don't last. Hair cells don't last. Okay? So don't think that you've permanently changed who you are just because you got a vaccine. That's just simply not true. Okay, where do they inject it? They inject it in your arm, really the shoulder, into muscle cells. That's the best way it gets in, okay? Now, why did Pfizer and Moderna go in the direction of messenger RNA? Well, because it's easier to manufacture. And the whole point of it is, once you have that whole process in place, it's much easier to get the vaccines out quickly. And it's much easier to peer review it because you're just focusing on this one function rather than trying to learn the whole entire virus itself. You're just training your immune system, to recognize those spikes, okay? So now the next question that I've heard from people that it's just been a constant thing is, well, they did it so quickly. How can they do it safely? Well, you got to remember this. In most cases, when they develop drugs, you go through each stage, right, of trial. If it shows a lot of promise, you get funding and you get to the second stage of the trial. Now, here's the thing, and then of course the third stage is the final stage of the trial. Here's the thing, though, because the federal government made it a priority and gave these pharmaceutical companies billions of dollars to develop this, there was no question about when we could start the second stage of the trial. It's like, boom, once you finish the first stage, you're instantly into the second stage. Now, why does it take drugs so long to get to market? It isn't just the trials. That's actually the quickest part of it. The longest part of it is the manufacturing, because they don't start the manufacturing until the drug's been approved for sale. Well, now, because of Operation Warp Speed, and not just Operation Warp Speed, there's been a lot of pharmaceutical companies that have gotten money to develop these vaccines, and they've got the green light to go through every stage consecutively. And what does that mean at the end? That the manufacturing process is already in place. So imagine if you're designing a car, right? You don't design the assembly line before you finish making the car, because you want to make sure the car is a success. It's been put through all the paces after it's been engineered properly. Then you get the assembly line in place and the production in place. In this case, the production was established during the time that the stages of trials were established. So they happened at the same time, which almost never happens. The only reason why it did happen is because of federal money. And not just federal money, people gave their personal money to these pharmaceutical companies to come up with these vaccines as quickly as possible. Like you mentioned, Dolly Parton gave
money to Moderna.
$1 million, and a lot of other people have too. Okay, so that's why they've had plenty of funding. Funding was not a problem for these pharmaceutical companies, and that's precisely why they were able to get these things up and running so quickly. Okay, they didn't bend any rules. They didn't cut any corners. They followed all the stages of trials that you would normally follow in that case. Okay, couple other things. Johnson & Johnson's and AstraZeneca is a little bit different than Pfizer and Moderna in the sense that the way they've designed the vaccine, their vaccines don't immediately go after the protein spikes. They actually do something a little bit different. What they do is they go after the whole entire, actually into the nucleus first, and try to destroy it from within, and then they get the spikes as well. Now, what is the advantage of that? Well, it's more all-encompassing. The downside of that is it's harder to manufacture. But the upside to Johnson's & Johnson's is you're only going to need one injection of Johnson's & Johnson's, which was really surprising to me. And I can talk more about that in the future as more information comes out. If you're interested, I'll certainly talk about it. But it is a lot harder to peer review, and that's precisely why Johnson's & Johnson's isn't quite ready yet. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about is that 70,000 people during these 3 stages of trial have already received these vaccines with comprehensive safety data. And like I said, I want to stress this again, it wasn't the fact that they only did a smaller sample size or that they rushed things through. No, they started the manufacturing complex while they started the first stages of trials. So everything would be ready. So the manufacturing process would be ready once the 3rd stage and the peer review and the FDA approval had occurred. Okay? Now also, what I want to talk about, okay, so you have to understand there are basically 3 parts of your immune system. You basically have your antibodies, and the antibodies are the first thing that, the first thing that attacks the virus itself. But you have to understand, once the virus gets inside your body and starts to infect you, the antibodies aren't as effective at that point. That's where the killer T cells, and if you've ever seen pictures of killer T cells, I probably should have got pictures of those for you, but they look a lot like the virus in that they do have protein spikes and they physically attack the virus itself. And then you also have helper T cells, which also help your immune system remember that particular foreign invader, which is the virus itself. Okay? So just remember those. Antibodies is the first stage. Then you got your killer T cells and your helper T cells. And I was talking to Sang last night about this, and I said, you know, it's interesting. Everything in life does have an aspect of violence to it, because it is a fight, literally a war, between the virus and your immune system, and your killer T cells and your helper T cells. They go to war and they physically attack the virus itself. That's why it's so important to keep yourself strong, because you need your immune system strong. And if you have a strong immune system, it's largely reflective of how strong you are physically. Okay? Anything you want to add to this, Sang?
No.
At the end. So I'm going to get out of the way here, and Sang's going to take over talking about foot function and how important it is. And I'll have some things to add to this as well, because I had to improve my foot function after my knee injury.
So towards the end, I do have some pictures of people who've gone through various surgeries. And so yeah, we'll go over that. Okay, so foot trivia. The foot, here's my handy dandy foot here, has 33 joints in each foot. So when you multiply that by 2, there's 66 joints. Just that have contact with the ground. There are 250,000 sweat glands in your feet. I don't know how many people can produce this, but you can produce a half a pint of perspiration a day. So this one I think is huge. Your toes carry half of your body weight every time you lift your heel off the ground. So toes, these little toes with these little joints, they do a lot of work, but yet I know every time I work with clients, they don't feel, they don't understand, they don't know. their foot's not mobile enough to actually even do some of these things. And so this one I find is very important right here. 25% of your body's bones are in your feet, which is why I emphasize that there's 66 joints, so a quarter, so 25% of those bones happen in contact with the ground. There's countless nerve endings and blood vessels in your feet. And so I will let this be very clear that the nerves and the blood vessels, they link all the way to the heart, the spine, and the brain. But yet, a lot of times we wear shoes that we can't feel. We don't feel our feet, and we actually can't even utilize our feet like our hands, because I always say that in general, that your feet should work like your hands or be pretty close. And then last is 3 out of 4 Americans will experience serious foot problems in their lifetime. Honestly, like I feel like almost every client I work with has some sort of foot problem. I even had one client who was so fast to jump on surgeries for her foot before we could even repair or do anything. I was actually kind of surprised the doctor wrote as many or allowed that many surgeries, but you know, it is what it is. So, okay, so that's our foot trivia. And I'm not going to go over every slide. I'm just going to try to point out just little details.
So people with neuropathy,
right?
I can see how that would be a problem in this case.
Right, and I mean, like that's the thing. We work with a lot of people who have neuropathy. Neuropathy can come from if you've had cancer treatment. You know, that's tough because, you know, that's not something you could have prevented. But I do have people who drink their share of alcohol, and yeah, there's neuropathy. So we got to decide what's more important. To me, my foot working, important. What's the other one that it can come from? I mean, I think that's...
Peripheral neuropathy you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the two main ones that I deal with, is usually because somebody's either had chemo or they drink quite a bit.
Yeah, that's pretty common. I mean, there's a lot of causes for peripheral neuropathy, but those are the primary ones.
Okay. So here we have the 6 signs humans are weaker than ever, which is kind of no surprise. That's what our society has come to. Technology, I think, plays a huge part in all of this. Starting from the ground, foot strength is weaker. And when foot strength is weak, you can't push into the ground. Therefore, your bone strength isn't going to improve because there's really nothing to resist against in somewhere. And it's actually, I don't have it in the slide. But like the difference between people who walk on the ground versus like people who are, for instance, are astronauts. If there's no resistance, it's kind of hard to build bone. Then from there, mobility in the hip is huge. That I find a lot of people cannot, they lose that function. And like I said in previous podcasts, that once you kind of lose your mobility in your hip, it affects your gait. Which is why like foot function is so important, and why I always try to cue through the feet for people to understand. But if you're used to not knowing what's happening all the way down there, it's easy to forget, like, oh, okay, everything, and I'll go into it later, how everything is connected. And then lung capacity is the seated posture, having like that C-curve spine, that really plays an impact on lung capacity. So with that, I mean, that's why it's important to have good posture, be able to connect with the ground and the earth as much as possible so that your system can work properly. Because also with decreased lung capacity, then turns into a brain issue because there's not enough oxygen going up to the brain. So here, this is one of the reasons why a lot of us do the strength training, is so that we can basically create enough force to strengthen and throughout our whole entire body. And be able to resist impact. So this one is very interesting because most of the, I mean, by the time we even get to a lot of the people that we have, their feet have already like changed considerably. So, really there could be a foot length problem, depending on like how you buy your shoes. Some people buy them too small, some people buy them too big. If your shoes aren't made for you, customized for you, then you run into one of those things. And then foot width is another one. So people who tend to have bunions on either side,
the feet are getting scrunched.
their feet, there's a lot of rub that happens in the shoe. So that then becomes another problem, which then changes the functionality, and I'm going to go into it later, is that toe joint right there.
Oh yeah, I can see that. That's a common spot for a lot of people.
Yeah. So in a man's shoe, more like, well, I guess you could say it could happen in a woman's shoe also, but this happens to be a man's shoe, but you can see what happens. He needs more space for those cute little wingtip shoes, but then his toes get scrunched up. And this is one problem that we have a lot of, is that people can't even like space out their toes. So this is really important. And, like I said, with feet, you want your feet to be like your hands, but a lot of times we can't do that because we spent so many years in this formation right here.
And that's how New Balance made their bones, right? By designing a wider shoe.
Yeah, they're known for that, but I wear New Balance, and at this point, even my New Balances rub on my feet, and I have pretty small feet.
And do you have the extra wides you get, or?
No.
You can order those.
Yeah, I don't order extra wide.
Well,
and that's the
small
other
feet anyway.
thing, is that the industry in general isn't going to carry that many types of shoes, because if people don't buy them, to them, it's just a number of like, oh, what can we eliminate? Most people buy these, therefore we will just carry these. Well, what happens if you fall out of that spectrum? And then now, with the way the world is going, with stores closing, I don't know how you're going to even find specialty shoes, to be quite honest. So, that's that. So, here.
Oh, yes.
This is
common shoes, huh?
No. So this is, I think this is Runner Zombie down on Cal Ave in Palo Alto. But for this generation specifically, and usually the older adult, you will find that when they go into a store, this is the first shoe that they offer to you, which is the Hoka.
Yeah, the big, thick.
And every time we have people who get into these shoes, they tell us how fabulous they are, which I'm sure they are fabulous, especially at, I want to say one of those is 120. But if you look at how built up the soles are, they, you're walking on clouds right here. So, and I don't mean like walking on clouds in a good way. There's no way you can connect with the ground and feel and react and have your brain understand like what your foot should be feeling down on the ground. It is pure comfort, that's for sure.
I can relate to this thing because before I met you, I never wore a shoe like this. But I will say I wore shoes more like these shoes over here, where they were pretty built up. Yep. And I had a lot of problems with Achilles pain through my 20s. I had a lot. Oh yeah, one of our shoes is actually there. I can get it.
Actually, can you grab my shoe?
Yeah.
My shoe is right out around the corner, look on the ground.
Got it.
And the only reason why I'm going to bring this up is, like I said, in these Hokas, you can't really see what's going on. But so these, Scott and I wear very similar shoes. Well, nowadays we do.
Yeah.
In the past we did not. But like I said, 33 joints per foot. And for sure, your standard shoe.
Wait till you get a load of this. This is what I used to wear, and I no longer wear.
So there's that, but like I always show people.
We can compare them side by side.
Yeah. So, and this is the foot in its joints.
And try not to look at just the size of the shoe. We're talking about the cushions here.
So I'm just going to go through it.
Yeah.
This is what my shoe does. My shoe can roll up and basically, and I'm going to go through this on the different arches. I mean, I have this much control in my foot, and you can't do any of that in any of these shoes. So that's the only reason why I brought that up is, I mean, and I actually have another pair that's even better than this, but.
Yeah, those are good examples though. Good to contrast. Okay, so, and I'll tell you, through my 20s, I had a problem where I aggravated my Achilles tendon, and I gotta say, it took me about 6 years to get over this, and it went from Achilles pain to plantar fascia pain, which is the bottom of your feet, and if I had treated it the way I would now, I would have gotten over that in about 6 to 8 months, but instead it took me 6 years because I didn't do any soft tissue work at the time. I had no idea how bad the bottom of my feet were, both of my feet, but especially the foot where I strained my Achilles. And you know where I strained it was using really lousy tennis shoes, like Kmart special tennis shoes, in a pickup football game. That was the worst thing I could have ever done. I paid for that for half a decade afterwards. But mostly because I didn't know how to treat it. No one knew how to treat this stuff back then. I knew guys in the NFL that had to retire because of plantar fascia pain. No joke. Eric Johnson was one of them, a former tight end on the 49ers.
And plantar fascia pain, I mean, plantar fasciitis, it's basically not being able to move the fascia. And if you're wearing one of those shoes that they use in football, like all it does is just cram your foot in. Yeah. So then you can't move anything. So you're basically supposed to run on these bricks, is what it comes down to. So that loses the ability of foot function also. Okay, so I just did this so that, I mean, people can relate female versus male. But on the left-hand side, and then this centered one is basically how you should be distributing your weight. So I always talk about this, like for instance, having your ear over your shoulder over your hips over your knees, and your knees over your ankles. That is the most ideal. However, a lot of times people find ways to balance without actually using a lot of their muscles, so they just kind of shift their bones to help do the balance work. So then they're wondering why they have to work so hard on abs. So the next one is going to be this one, where some people basically tip back, and then they just kind of use their ribs a little as weight bearing, so you can see it. This is the heavier weight, and then everything is shifted back, and you can see there's usually going to be like tightness in their quads. And then
I can see forward head there on her too.
Yeah, and this one's completely is completely relaxed. And then what's different here is actually she uses her pelvis and just kind of like dumps right into her low back by tipping her tailbone. I think probably this guy's a little bit easier to see because he basically has the exaggerated version of what she has. And then this guy is the middle.
Yeah, I would say like my father's more like this guy right here.
Yes.
And I would say this person right here is the person I see most often with women. Yeah. I see how the head's forward, not a lot, just slightly. And now there is some lordosis there, but not a ton. But it's really misaligned between the cervical vertebrae, the lumbar, and the feet. You can see that.
Yeah. We can go on and on about these.
Yeah, we could talk forever. We can't do a 2-hour podcast. Yeah.
So here's a little bit more about what happens in the pelvis and why I always talk about it so much in a lot of my classes. And I think sometimes it gets a little lost. And I don't have my my model. I do have a hip model, but unfortunately it's in Belmont. So this is just all the different directions that you'll see. So here you go. So this one is a little bit, this is a little bit like you.
Yeah.
The lordosis.
That's an lordosis.
Even though he can kind of keep this close to neutral.
Yeah.
But because of his accident, he has a severe lordosis here,
Yeah.
which he works on. And whenever, he's perfectly fine fixing it when we exercise. So that's great. He strengthens in the correct posture. But his resting is going to be this, which is fine if you're resting. At least you know the difference. But most people take one or the other. They don't know how to go, oh, this is my resting posture, and then this should be like my strengthening posture. And then here's where you can see, like, you start doing all these things, you start locking out your knees, and in order to push everything forward so you don't have to balance anything and use your muscles. And then this one is the ideal, which is neutral, where everything is stacked. So there's no joint that's necessarily weighing on the other. And then also, this knee joints are hyperextended. This is why people have trouble with their knees.
Yeah, it's no accident that so many people need to have their knees replaced. And it's not just one thing. It's really the combination of things that you do through your life that will contribute to that. Front and center is bad posture.
Yeah. And actually, I have something else that kind of talks about this more. So just really simple, these are the different types of foot types by foot arch. I'm not going to go into detail. This is the type of stuff that I do one-on-one with people. I'm not necessarily, it's very specific. You have to understand what's happening throughout the whole body and not just parts like this. Because even Scott and I because we were looking at this for ourselves, and it's like, you're kind of in between two of these. And I know for me, I actually have one of two different types of foot types. And very simply put is my left foot is normal. My right foot, because I don't use it so much, I have that higher arch because it's not good at dispersing force, and it's tighter, which I have to spend the time working on that. And if I do, it's great. I mean, over the years, I've gotten it to work better, and I'll talk about why that's important. But this is not necessarily something your average person should know. It's just so that you know that they do exist. So so the foot has two actions. It can either what we call supinate, which is basically kind of be on the outside edges of your foot, or it should pronate also, which means you can bring your big toe down. And the problem is most people don't know what's happening with their big toe because they're turned out, is one. So for instance, if you walk with your toes facing I call it facing the corners, but they call that foot flare. And I'm going to go into why that's important. The other thing is a lot of people have this internal knee rotation, so they might look like they kind of have knock knee, and that's because the bones have potentially rotated in. The other thing, once you start walking outward, you're going to start building, based on forces, you could potentially start building, your Achilles tendon won't be as supple. It basically tightens up.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then, so then you have flat foot, which I can't say I've seen flat foot.
I see this a lot. I call those flip-flop walkers. They look like ducks the way they walk.
Yeah, and so that's actually how I got into the problem I got into is once I stopped having a desk job and stopped having to go into an office, I did wear flip-flops a lot because I worked out barefoot.
Wait,
but the problem,
you wear flip-flops?
I do. I wear flip-flops. And by the way, P.S., these are the worst flip-flops.
I was just going to say, good example.
But I wear them around the house, and actually we're not even up here that often. And it's because there's two things. The other thing is we have laminate floors. So laminate floors, I might as well be walking on concrete barefoot. So I don't know that that's any better either. So there's a lot of consequences to a lot of things. You have to be informed, and you have to make these decisions. Same thing with marble, although marble might resonate a little. But the best flooring is real hardwood floors. And don't even know that many people who have really nice
Yeah,
hardwood floors.
it's mostly older houses that have them. The
Right.
newer ones just
But
use
usually
laminate.
they're carpeted over or what
Yeah,
have you. So
Yeah, I like
anyway.
laminate a lot, but because it does look like hardwood, it just doesn't feel like it.
And it doesn't react through your body the same way.
No,
So
not at all.
I know a few people with flat foot, but normally they're born with flat foot. And to me, like there's flat foot, it's a little bit debatable because if you're flat foot and you know how to make your foot arch, you're fine. But if you're flat foot and it doesn't do anything, then you have a problem, which I have seen. So, and I know people who've had surgeries to make their, to basically take care of that high arch, and then all of a sudden they can't control their feet.
Yeah.
So that is why usually I do not recommend people have surgery. And then last, you'll see uneven wearing on the shoes. You'll notice either the sides or the inside. Like you can already see which foot gets more, or does more work. It's the right foot. So on top of that, so then you'll see over here with the arch dropping, the knee rotation, and then there's this, when the pelvis is no longer on the same plane, one is higher than the other, you have low back, people usually complain about low back issues. Also, it will adjust on the shoulders, and this also will determine, like, breathing becomes interesting too, just because the shoulders won't be leveled, and you need these collarbones to help you breathe. So having one just kind of hanging out you're changing your structure, and this is why we always talk about, like, try to find center, try to balance everything out. Like,
And I see this a lot.
Oh, this one's
This
huge.
is so common with Parkinson's people, even post-stroke people,
Yep.
or people that just have movement disorders will look like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so the foot. Here is where, we'll go this one first. This is where weight goes through and based on the muscles. So in your forefoot, it's your knees, your quads, your calves, your quad tendon, your patellar tendon, and your Achilles tendon are all in that forefoot. Midfoot should be pretty neutral. And then your heel should be your hips, your glutes, and your hamstrings. So usually when we ask people, well, when I ask people, where do you feel the most of your weight, it's always in their toes. And usually you can kind of see it because it's in their toes, and then across this arch is where they rest all of their weight.
And what do I tell my students and your students? You tell all the time, use your glutes and hamstrings, and if you can't use your heel, you're not striking your heel, guess what? You've essentially disabled your strongest muscle group, which is your posterior chain, your glutes, hamstrings, hip.
Yeah, and I always think of this group is what helps you accelerate, but this group will drive power, and it should help you what we call decelerate. Although the calf kind of helps in deceleration.
Yeah, they all work together.
But that's kind of the easiest way I tend to explain it to people. So when people can't, and this happens with the older adult, when you become a fall risk, you don't know how to use this heel and these glutes and hamstrings, which are directly lined up to your hips. So this is that hip control, the hip mobility that no longer exists. So this is why we spend so much time in hip, glutes, and hamstrings, trying to teach it in class. I don't usually talk too much about quads, but that's when I ask, what do you feel? It's always, I feel my quads. So I can pretty much tell where you're resting all of your weight. So from reflexology, you can see like basically the foot is tied to just about everything. Your organs. Yeah, it's all mostly organs. And then your head at the top. So.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Makes me think of acupressure.
Yeah,
or acupuncture.
it's based on Chinese medicine. So. Okay, so this is what I was going to talk about earlier. What I was saying was that, so you should be able to have what we call foot stability. And when I say foot stability, I don't mean that it's just locked up and constantly stable. It should know how to react. Ankles should be mobile. So that one should just be able to kind of hover over the foot. That ankle mobility is usually why a lot of people I find don't balance well. They don't single leg balance. Knees should be stable, but I find that people use their knees to do all kinds of things. They use their knees to push doors closed. They use their knees when they go to when they go to squat. But I mean, where injury happens is that they'll use their knee to move something rather than use other things, like try to use more hip type things than instead they use their knee, which if you've ever seen the makeup of the knee, like that is not a joint I would want to use.
Yeah, it's not designed to handle the heaviest load. The hips are much better for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go up the rest of the joints, but the only thing here also is this is the joint by joint process. I think that's Mike Boyle's thing. But anyway, what happens is when the foot locks up, then next thing you know, your ankles are going to lock up, and then now your knee moves way too much. So even though your feet and ankles are what really hurts, what's going to bear the brunt is the knee, because these are already locked up. But now you're going to try to find mobility from your knees. And actually, I guess I will go, because once you kind of move up this chain and your hip mobility locks up, now you're going to start looking for mobility through your lumbar spine. And lumbar spine can't move that much. But if you try to find it and somehow get it, then that's how you end up hurting yourself and having back problems and all kinds of things. So many people I know, L5, S1, or L5, all of the lumbars, they tend to have some sort of issue. And this is why everything's locked up from down below. They don't function properly. Now I have to figure out how I'm going to do locomotion. And this is all I have available to me. And maybe throwing a leg, but that I don't necessarily call hip mobility. If you can't actually even strike and move through, you're just kind of throwing your leg forward. So but that's how that all works. And actually, you can play all the way up to the shoulder now that I think about it. Because once you don't get mobility, I mean, I do have somebody in one of my classes who kind of uses the shoulder, and it looks like there's a lot of, it looks very fast. Because the shoulders can pump real fast, but the problem is nothing else pumps in the same, like there should be a bone rhythm that happens naturally. When you try to force one bone to go and basically pull all the other bones along, that's when you get into trouble of things hurting and things wearing out. So, okay, so I talk about this a lot in class.
Tripod.
The foot tripod. Foot tripod is very important because that means you are using your feet properly in order to engage with the ground. And that's the triangle right there. Underneath the big toe, underneath the little toe, and then kind of near the heel. It's at that point is right in front of the heel bone. So, and the reason why you need all those is you need it to create these arches, which I'm going to go in the next one, but somehow this slide is here, so we'll just go over it. So you need to be able to create an arch before you can start walking. Otherwise, if you have floppy feet, you can't really move anywhere. So you need this structure to happen. So this is considered short foot, that you can basically pull up your toes to create this arch so that you can propel forward. Once that happens, you have to be able to roll over the big toe. So notice it is a circle. I find most people treat it like a square. Or it is a square because it's not participating. But it should be like a wheel and that you just roll over. And the reason why this is super important is there is a biomechanical thing that happens here, which is the windlass mechanism, that once you roll over, you pull all the muscles through your body. But if you don't pull, then you do other things. You have to roll through something else. You're going to try to roll through probably your ankle if you can't roll through your big toe. But here's the problem. If you can't roll through your big toe, in that picture you saw, I mean, the easiest way to put it is big toe is related, it goes straight up to your glute. So when people can't actually use their big toe, to me, that you can't feel you can't work your glute. And that's a whole half of your body, and probably your strongest line of strength is from your big toe to your glute.
Yeah, no doubt.
And then eventually you have to get your ankle over to get.
And that's where we see in the gait a lot with people, especially people with Parkinson's. You start to see the foot slapping rather than the heel strike, and the rolling and the pushing off of the balls of the feet.
Yeah, and the reason why the push off is really important, I mean, you have to work through every single joint. If you can't push off and you're just slapping, then you're creating that scenario for,
and I can relate to this because I have problems with my big toe on my left foot. So oftentimes with me, when I put that that big, what is that? First met. When I put that first met down and I try to push off of it, I get pain that shoots up, and it really comes from back here, that flexor hallucis tendon. So what I do is I roll that soft tissue out there, and it relaxes, and then I get that extra range of motion. We're just talking a little bit, but it really allows for me to function better. It improves my gait, and then my pain starts to subside. So, and I've been battling that my whole adult life.
And since I have the foot here, and I don't usually have one at work to show people or in class, because our skeleton is kind of quite the mess.
Yes. She's had a lot of problems.
For those of you who roll your feet, this point right here on both sides, these two right here, the way it looks underneath on a bone or on a skeleton is this, and I don't know if you can see it, but basically they're like two protruding bones here. That is one area you should not just kind of willy-nilly roll. I would actually, if I were rolling my foot, I would roll around it and then through the big toe and then come back. So between the big toe and the second toe, and then come back and then come back down. Then go to the next toe and then go from there. Because these two bones, if you were able to feel them, they're two sesamoid bones, which are like two kneecaps. So to roll out two kneecaps regularly, especially with a hard ball, which
not
is
a good
why,
idea.
I've heard of people being able to wear away bone spurs because they are obsessed with rolling, and the same thing is true. And if you've never had like sesamoid issues, I do know somebody who's had to actually have surgery twice.
Cam Newton, the quarterback, was on the Carolina Panthers. Was struggling with that. He couldn't play all last season. Now he's on New England. He's on the Patriots. Sure but he was out the whole year because of it.
Yeah. You don't want to deal with sesamoid.
And this is a young guy, relatively speaking.
Okay, so those are all the arches, why it's so important to be able to draw up your foot. So from the big toe to the fifth toe is what we call transverse arch. So that's going to be straight across the top, where most people push off. And I like this alignment a lot. I even try to use this alignment when I drive, because like I said, if you're not good at connecting these different arches, then that's where trouble happens. So you can see the red is optimal. So look how wide that triangle should be. And then you do get people who have like a narrower
tripod,
foot tripod.
Yeah.
So notice you've lost the big toe. So if you've lost the big toe in this particular arch, then you're using either your second toe, but sometimes I find people actually they use another part, which is a little bit out here, to make that bigger arch, because they're like what we consider hypermobile, and then they have bunions. So you don't want to be on that side either. You really, oh, here you go. That's the other, that is I don't usually see this a lot, but okay. Where you just go straight through the big toe rather than the joint itself. So you're trying to use the toe. That one I don't see too much.
Yeah.
But
people tend to load one part of their foot more than the other.
yeah, so I find more people just on the outside of their foot, just kind of hanging out, and I have a picture of what that comes from. And then I have some people who are dropping in, which is on their medial arch. So then this is what looks like a collapsed arch, is when you're resting on the medial side. And then here's what, I mean, they all happen. Overpronation, that's that resting on the inside arch, but then you see what happens up the chain. Regular pronation should happen. That's a normal thing, but not overpronation. Overpronation is not normal. Neutral, you should be able to stand neutral. Supination, and that's the thing, some people they'll notice one foot is, when they run, they're big supinators, so they do that whole like whipping, kicking outward. They look really floppy when they run. And then, well, I guess that's technically over supination. Like I said, supination should happen. So these are normal, and then more people live in these two worlds. So you should be able to root, which is what we call corkscrewing. So into the ground, and there should be a stopping point, but most people don't have a stopping point, so it kind of goes all the way, and that's how you get your bunions. And then, so what I was saying earlier, depending on what type of foot you have, so if you're more of an overpronator, it's subconscious, and that's how you dampen forces from the environment. So the environment is more of an issue on you versus you being affected by you affecting the environment. So you tend to produce a lot of force, it's conscious, and you're a supinator. And then this is what happens when people have injuries. So once you have some sort of ankle tear, it's really hard to repair that, or even to have it repair on its own, actually. So once you kind of, some people do constantly roll through their ankle and it never comes back. So that's why you have to be really good on the other parts of the foot to balance all of this out. And then those are just all of the different angles that can happen. And we always like neutral. So I mentioned short foot, being able to make that rigid arch in order to do locomotion. Next thing is toe spread, being able to basically get all of your toes to go away from each other. First toe extension is being able to pull the big toe up, which is what's needed for walking properly. Then being able to push down and then have your other toes be able to move. And they can move together. I mean, I play this game with Scott where I try to move each toe individually. That's that's just me wanting good foot function.
Yeah, that's great.
But that's not necessary. You can just do big toe and the other four separate. So in the gait cycle, that whole thing about being able to push off, you'll see it happen here, 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 and then everything else comes through the heel. So that's why you want to be able to roll, because if you can't roll, I think I have another picture that exhibits it way better, but being able to push off your big toe, it's part of gait. And do it naturally and not, oh, I gotta work on that. It's not that. If you really have to work that hard, then that means there's something else up the chain that's not working properly. Usually it's alignment. So, and then extension. That's the other problem we run into a lot, is that people don't have good extension so that they can walk. So it's basically a short step, so it doesn't travel as much through the body. So then all the other joints don't move as much when you walk if you don't have extension either. So there's the extension that we're looking for. Like I said, that's why this big toe is really important, because it should pull the plantar fascia, it should pull the Achilles tendon, it should pull the calf, and then just go straight up to glute. And then everything else can just move naturally. And if you tend to turn out a lot, or you rest a lot of weight on the outside of your foot, this is what hurts a lot. So a lot of people talk about, oh, my IT band hurts. I mean, it's most likely the glute, but if you're just kind of resting there, that's why it hurts. And then here is what we look for in what your feet can do. So like I said, you want to be able to come up onto your toes so that you have this great toe function without, so this is more ideal. This one, you notice, this is where you get this tight foot, and this is where a lot of people do, because I have clients who do this. When they go to do heel raises, they want that extra, but this is what happens with extra. It changes the form of your foot along the way, and then this will eventually become a tight foot, an immobile foot that will not be able to walk properly. And then this just goes back to something we looked at earlier. And the reason why I put this picture in is because this one shows like what will happen. You might have a neck ache when your shoulders aren't level. You'll have low back pain when your hips aren't level. Your knees won't feel comfortable if you have one that's internally rotated. And then you have an unstable foundation. And once you get to this point, then balancing is really hard. I actually have somebody who can't balance on either foot. Usually it's just one foot. And then some people do go the route of getting orthotics. So that shows how pretty things are. But orthotics are not meant to be long-term. So ideally, I mean, and this is why, it's an artificial foot support, and it weakens your foot muscles because your foot muscles don't have to work anymore. They're just already in this one shape, whatever shape that is. And then once the muscles become weak, you're more prone to injury, which is why you're constantly, I can't go anywhere without my orthotics. Over time, the alignment can change if you're not good at checking in, because that's the thing. Some people get these orthotics and think that's the answer, and then they never go back and get them checked. And yeah, and they're hard on the athlete because your foot can't basically take all the motions and take in force and disperse. So this goes back to the postures that we looked at earlier. And as you can see, foot gets turned out versus toes forward, which I always try to get people to work on. More of all the things that happen. Okay, so now we get to people who are like, oh, I'll just get some sort of hip replacement, knee replacement, whatever. So this is somebody who actually genetically has an issue. And the only reason why I put it in was one, so you could see what they do. They put screws, and it's titanium. But the other thing is, notice over time what happens is the pelvis is no longer leveled, which then affects the spine. But I like this picture a whole lot because I talk about it is how much space do you have inside your hip crease? And I always cue things like you want to create space inside your hip. And this is why, because if you look, this one does not have as much space as this one. And you can even see the directions of the screws, or they're going in a different place. This is what we work towards, but most people tend to close off their hip. So, but I mean, this person does great things and sets records. So that's why this happens, you know, and it's great. I mean, you know, to have these accomplishments, but you definitely have to put in the work after that, you know, a lot of restoratives has to happen. And then here's the same thing, post-surgery. We talked about it a lot, is that you should always have muscle. And this is why, because when you go through surgery, you can see this type of difference between the surgical side and the non-surgical side. So you will atrophy. That's just the way it works when you can't apply pressure. This is going to take time to rebuild up to this, but I think if I'm not mistaken, he's waiting for another, I think just taking time in between so that he can have surgery on the other side.
Wow.
Yep, so CrossFit athlete who I'm almost sure he needs 2 knee replacements.
God, Lord.
So this is why you should always train to be the best that you can be, because you don't know at what point you're going to be down and at what point one limb is not going to be able to work because it needs to heal. And you want it to heal properly so that you can come back and go back to these strength gains. But if you don't have a good baseline, then...
And that's a good point, because when I was going through my post-surgery, I really relied on my right leg to get myself up and down. And if it wasn't as strong as it was, I would have been completely disabled in every way.
Yeah, and even the doctor told Scott that, like, you can't let anything happen to this leg, and rightfully so, because he didn't want Scott back on the table, because we've had students who've had a surgery and then they had to go back again because of something that happened. They fell or what have you.
Yeah.
So, and then, I mean, I understand that I put in a bunch of athletes, you guys see Scott, but this is not unusual. Like, this is somebody I used to work with, and she waited a year to contact me again. I mean, I worked with her before this happened. She took a fall, and then here we are, and I mean, and not only that, this was pre-pandemic. I'm actually not even allowed inside the nursing home now, so I can't help her at this point. And they definitely don't have the staff to do it either, so I mean, you have to be on top of your recovery, and if you don't have access, you need to find a way, if it's through Zoom, and this is why we try to get people to continue on Zoom, because some movement is better than no movement, because a year of not doing anything, like, that's where it is. And I can't say I was ever, I mean, we worked really hard at trying to get it back, but every time I went to work with her, this is what it looked like. So basically here, earlier I talked about being able to extend your hips, like this is pretty much how it should look. Even if you're not a runner, you still need that extension in order to get to your glutes and to have hip strength so that you can have hip mobility and strong hips. And strong hips support the low back and the abs. And honestly, like, even if you're standing and you take one foot off, now I have like one side that gets to work the whole ab. The other one's just kind of holding up. So I have no resistance on the other side. So if I just decide I'm not going to use one leg, of course my abs aren't going to work. Which is why you always have to figure out, like, you have to have the best center of mass through all of these movements. And then lastly, over the years, like in 2009, it wasn't that long ago where people, oh, I need to release all my muscles so that I don't have pain. But in 2019, you're looking, well, yeah, okay, you get temporary relief, but it's not a long-term solution, and you need to figure out, like, what's wrong with the tissue and make cellular changes. So over time, like, we've progressed quite a bit on kind of knowing what's going on with our body. Exercises that were once considered good, people are questioning, like, was it really good? Because now there's a lot of exercise studies going on. So in 2009, bending over with the flexed spine might not be good for your back, as you've been told. However, in 2019, for those of us who are like, okay, let's test this out and see how much I can do, a spine that's resilient can do a lot of different things. I mean, and that's what this is all about. It's about resiliency, and that's why a lot of us are trying to do all of this work the younger you are, the better you'll be able to, I mean, you will hit a point that you can't do certain things, but that's why you got to start young. Same thing in 2009, basically, if you had a disc injury, they wouldn't let you lift. In 2019, you work with people to wait till the discs heal, and then you start working with back specialists and people who specialize in strengthening a back in order to get yourself back. I mean, I have so many people who have back pain that as soon as they have back pain, we're done. Nothing, you know, they won't do anything. I mean, I kind of teeter on this a lot. I have back pain, but I will still deadlift. But I do it a certain way. Like I'm aware enough of my body that I can still train even with back pain. But that's something that you really have to know what you're doing in order to do that kind of stuff. But if you don't know what to do, then you end up staying 11 years back where I don't do anything. I don't get help. I don't figure this out. You go nowhere. So with no change, you will always be in the same place, if not worse than before. That's it. Oh, no, it's not it. This is actually really important. The hierarchy of functional aging. So we have a whole continuum of an elite athlete, a fully fit athlete, semi-fit, higher end, lower end, pre-frail, frail, and then dependent. So your life choices determine where you get to be on this wheel. I mean, personally, I wish I were an elite athlete. That's never going to happen. But it's really cute. I mean, he looks like he's probably 80 something.
Mm-hmm. He's doing a perfect clean there.
He's doing like the most complicated move that
Olympic
the human body can do. Well, squat and overhead. Like that's every joint is being used. Being able to play your sport, I mean, that's amazing. And I work a lot with these people. It's great when they can do certain things, and you know, there are still people who participate in the Senior Olympics. So these are great places to be. Great, you can be high functioning and be able to travel, and that's fun. I mean, who wouldn't want to be there? But then you kind of hit this part of the spectrum where things change. Like, how much help do you need in this end now? And the reason why I did not want to skip this is because of this. So here we have physical function and what it entails. And so many times I work with people that they don't want to do certain things. And then you start losing certain abilities. So when we talk about foot function, like I said, foot function basically informs the brain of a lot of things. And one thing I will say here, if your feet don't work well, you're going to start losing joint integrity. You want to take that out, strength will decrease. Speed is most likely long gone, and endurance is probably not there. Then we lose this whole side of physical function. Then from there, once this gets lost, you can go down to cardiorespiratory, which in this day and age of pandemic, you need all of this. And if you don't have foot function, this decreases also. Then from there, you'll notice right away, in fact, you might notice this one even first, is that you no longer have good balance. Fitness is not way up there. Your center of gravity, you have no idea where it is, and your posture has gone downhill. Which then usually when I get to this point, when I ask people, well, can you feel this? Can you feel that? It becomes very like, let me think about it. I mean, like, if you can't answer it right away, then that means your brain has no idea what's going on. Usually I'm asking what's going on with your feet. Do you feel your lats? Do you feel your core? I have to think about it. So now we've lost 3 ends, 3 out of 6. And then neuromuscular, which is what one of our classes is based on solely, is reaction time is slow, motor control, like fine motor control is hard. I've been in this world where I tried to get my mom to learn how to write, and when I needed her the most to be able to write something to me because she was on a ventilator, I didn't know what she needed. So fine motor skills are really important. And then a lot of times I have people who will instantaneously tell me when they come to see me, I'm not coordinated. That is neuromuscular. So then we just kind of go down all into these ends of mobility, not being able to do certain things. I mean, this floor sit to stand, like this is why we do get-ups. And I have a handful of people willing to do get-ups. Gait, usually I find most people gait could really be worked on. Agility, I only have one person who works on agility regularly, who's in one of our classes and actually works on running gait. But like I said, since most people need to work on their walking gait, when you go to running, it's not any better if the walking gait's not good. And then last is the whole cognitive thing, which I could go into forever. We're just going to leave it at that since we're going to end this.
Yeah.
So, literally.
Sorry, this was a bit longer than we anticipated, but there's a lot of information to cover here. And I'm not sure when we're going to come back to you for our next podcast, because we are going to be in Houston next week. I don't know, maybe we'll do something there. It'll probably be a lot shorter though. Okay, thanks for such a wonderful presentation on the foot. That's all stuff that we need to learn and improve on. I know I've learned from you quite a bit myself and have a lot better function as a result. All right, everyone. If you have a question, leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon, all right?
Have a good holiday.
Happy holidays.